microbial diversity and a diversity of plant species and of people and of cultures. I feel like it all is so interwoven. Maybe once we've done enough regenerating, then we can talk about sustaining. So for me, that's my framing that I approach this with, is like transition of any kind needs holding.
Heaven forbid we only have one systems midwife. This world needs
God,
millions.
yeah. Oh my God.
Welcome back to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast, a podcast dedicated to reintroducing personal narratives into critical public health topics. On today's episode, my conversation with Nadine Clopton. Nadine is the founder of Conscious Consulting, a values-driven consulting firm that promotes and supports systems change. Her work brings people together from across sectors to build shared understanding, bridging divides and connecting complex topics like soil health and human flourishing. In her previous work at Rodale Institute, she co-created the Regenerative Healthcare Conference, which brought together farmers, doctors, and many players in the food as medicine landscape to discuss and develop synergistic ways forward, promoting the health of humanity and the planet. In this conversation, we discuss her work and our shared love for people, planet, microbes, and beautiful, nourishing foods. Please enjoy my conversation with Nadine Clopton. Nadine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Marian. Thank you for having me.
It is so my pleasure. So I want to start where I love to start because I really feel like everyone's life is this journey that begins with little them. So I want to go back to little Nadine, and I would love to know, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
I love this question. The favorite podcast opening question ever. When I was a little girl, I was convinced I would be multiple things, which checks out for me now.
I was going to say, you were right.
Absolutely. So one was holistic doctor.
Okay, check.
The other was opera singer. And the other was like holistic psychiatrist type thing. Obviously had a very avant-garde taste for all things integrative and holistic from a young age. So I think I knew somewhere deep down.
Clearly. And I do want to circle back to that because oddly, when I was in high school, I remember saying to someone, I wish when I grew up I could be like a psychiatrist, except like only treat people with food. And they literally laughed in my face and were like, you would be like banned from practicing. You would lose your license. And I was like, I know, you're so right. And then it was just like, ha ha. But
who would ever do that?
Who would do that? Crazy. But anyway, we'll just table that for a second. Okay, so you knew little Nadine had the vision because fast forward, you're doing essentially much of that in a variety of different packages. So from that dream, did that impact what you chose to study when it was time to go off to college?
Yeah, honestly, it's when I was looking at colleges, for me, the most important thing was having the freedom and the flexibility to pursue a lot of interests and to take a lot of classes. I didn't want to go somewhere where I'd be stuck taking gen eds for 2 years. So I ended up at Lehigh. And initially I had gone in with a declared major in cognitive science. And I was interested in that because it seemed to be a little more integrative of a way to approach, all things psychology. And I wanted to just have that holistic view embedded into it. I ended up having a double major in Lehigh's version of public health is health, medicine, and society. So there was that piece and political science with then double minors in sustainable development and environmental studies. So I really was able to capture all of my interests, both, ecological to the interpersonal to systemic. So it was a great experience.
It's really cool to hear that because I feel like for so many people in this space, and this is not a bad thing, they start with one piece of it, and maybe in their studies, they study one piece of it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then it takes like a decade of kind of winding around this way and that way to go, oh, I'm interested in policy, but now that you mention it, that does impact health, and it does
For
involve
sure.
agriculture, and it does involve the environment, and they are all connected. But it sounds like you had a flash at age 18, 19, 20,
Mm-hmm.
where you were immediately connecting all those dots. So I'm curious, like, did that really just grow out of your own interests, or was there a mentor maybe who shaped you? Because I do feel like sometimes we meet people and they
Yeah.
can change our lives. So was there anything there like that?
Honestly, I feel like it was a function of taking classes that I just loved, and then I'd look at what it was cross registered with. So, for example, my favorite class in undergrad was food justice in urban environments,
Mm.
and it was taught. Shout out Dr. Karen Pooley. She's amazing. She ended up being my master's advisor when I stayed for a fifth year to do their environmental policy design program. And it was the first time, I had really encountered someone thinking about how the food environment shapes health outcomes. It was something I feel like I had engaged with a little bit. And, growing up, my mom is diabetic. And so I was always kind of part of her care, and having to see, just her struggle through that and thinking there has to be another way of approaching this and being able to extract more quality of life for patients living with chronic disease. Had my own bout with that. So it really, when I'd take a class like that food justice class, it was an environmental studies course, which was cross-listed as public health. And so I, by virtue of, having enough credits, ended up with that hodgepodge of majors and minors. And I really do owe it to a lot of the professors that I encountered at Lehigh who were like, hey, I think you might like doing this next semester. And even my professor that taught sustainable development, he like pushed us so far outside the norm of what you'd encounter in academia. His name's Dr. Mark Orrs. He's amazing. He's at the Colorado School of the Mines now, running their regenerative development programs. But he'd have us read like Alan Watts and like encounter all of this text that had this almost dharmic quality to it. And so I feel like through my academic experience, I was able to kind of find a bit of the mystical too. There was like a Buddhism and global ecology class too. So it fed something deeper within me. And I feel like, both in college and now, so much of how I try to live my life is just by following resonance and alignment. And all of those things just lit me up and felt really aligned. So yeah, I tried to lean in.
I just love hearing all of that because, I have this semi-secret agenda, which is like, I'm a mom, I have daughters, and I'm always sort of talking to them about how education is important, but also it's not about playing by specific rules. Or, you hear kids these days saying, you won't get into the best colleges if you don't have XYZ, this many years of language and that many years of volunteering. And it's like language and volunteering are super great, but don't do it because you're trying to check boxes. Do it because those things light you up. And when you follow the things that light you up, you'll end up the place that was right for you. So it sounds like that really happened in your case.
Absolutely.
And sort of following those little clues and hints and sparkles and glimmers, right?
For
like
sure.
There's so much opportunity for that, but it's not really what the education system is training kids to look for necessarily. So I just love to kind of highlight that because it's important to me as a person who had a very non-traditional path through education, partially because I felt very wounded by the traditional path and wanted to reject it outright. It took me more than a decade to fall back in love with school per se. I was out there learning, but the school of hard knocks or what have you, the school of teen mom. But now it's like I love academia. I love research and I love mentorship and all of that. But I feel like that uniqueness is what's so special about learning.
Absolutely.
Not just like following the path as you're supposed to.
For sure. I mean, if you think about modern education, it's designed to create good workers.
Right.
Folks that'll fit within the 9 to 5 or the 6 to 6, like whatever that might look like for them. It's not designed to like spark creativity and nurture that and be like, what lights you up? Let's do more of that. And you're pathologized if you don't sit still and focus. And, if kids out and about in the wild, they like, that's not natural. They don't
Right.
want to be sitting for 8 hours a day at a desk, deeply concentrating under, harsh fluorescent lights. Like that's not biologically aligned with what we would have experienced. And so, I think about that a lot. I don't have kids yet. We're a few years out, but really as starting to think about what I want motherhood to look like for me and how I want to architect, my early childhood experience for my kiddos, like I'm a little nervous about what, the mainstream education paradigm looks like on that front. And it's, depending where you are, it's public schools can be amazing and they can also be really tough. And so it's a wild card.
It is. And kids, I will say, kids are very resilient in my experience. My daughters went to, it's called the outdoor nursery school, and it's literally
amazing.
Outdoors. And with every transition to public kindergarten, I thought, oh no, like surely going from like doing yoga under the trees to sitting at a desk all day, they're going to freak out. But they never did. They just kind of seamlessly went from, oh yeah, I used to do yoga under the trees all day, and now I go to school, and both are good. So
Yeah,
I do feel like as humans, we can tolerate a lot of challenge and diversity of experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's, my hope, because like the school systems are so important. Teachers are essential and they're few and far between now. I mean, it's such a hard job and it's a thankless job in a lot of ways. It's my father-in-law, has been at it for over 30 years in a middle school in a really tough community. And it's hard. It's hard. And so, my hope for, at least for the public school system, is that there is an infusion of, how do we nurture their creativity? How do we find ways to personalize it a little bit? But there's no right answers.
Absolutely. And I mean, we could go off on an entire hour-long tangent about school food and how just solving that crisis could dramatically revolutionize the way that students show up and feel cared for and nourished within schools. But I don't think we have time for all of that. So I'm going to dial it back. But I do want to ask a follow-up question about your background, because off camera earlier, we talked a bit about you being from Ukrainian Russian heritage. And I've noticed that my Russian friends are really into like holistic healing, like tea, like different herbs, like they know the bushes in my yard and how to use them as medicine. So do you think at all that like your lineage, your background contributed to your early understanding of that sort of holistic health connection?
Honestly, yeah, I think in a lot of ways, even if my grandmother isn't like, this is plantain, it will help like draw out, bee stings. She always incorporated herbs into her cooking and was always leaning into really seasonal nourishment. And that was just such a core pillar of how she loves us. I call her my Baba, short for babushka. And like Baba always, even today, that's how she expresses love, is through food. And so much of our culture, across Eastern Europe is so deeply interwoven with food. And as, my Baba will say, it's peasant food. It's not, anything extravagant. It's beets, carrots, potatoes, often served in different ways. But it's nourishment at the end of the day. And there's something so beautiful about being able to lean into ancestral foods and to see the ways that, those recipes have been passed from grandmother to granddaughter, generations over. She learned from her grandmother. And so to me, there's something so sacred about that. And, when I'm making my borscht, I'm always thinking about her and thinking about how like it's helping increase blood flow. And then I'm adding in parsley and dill and all these different aromatic, like digestive herbs to support my system, as we're going deep into winter. Yeah, and even like rosehip tea, that was always a thing. If I started to feel a little bit under the weather, she's like, Nadia, have rosehip tea. And I'm like, okay, perfect. I didn't put two and two together until my 20s that I'm like, wait, it's because it's really high in vitamin C. And I don't even know if that is what registers for her, but it almost doesn't need to
Right.
when there's that connection, to lineage. So I've never been back over to Ukraine. It's my mom came when she was 10 years old. And they came here as refugees. And I've never gotten the chance to go back. I'm hoping someday I will, because I'd love to connect just with the terrain and with the herbs and getting to experience all that. And I think it's also amazing what ancestral foods find you in life. Like, even if it's not something that's passed through your direct lineage, I think about chaga in my case. Chaga, as I'm sure you know, is a super powerful antioxidant. And I was just so drawn to it, probably around like 24, 25. And I started working with it really closely. I was making my little chaga teas like all the time. And it was only until later that I found out, I'm like, oh, this is ancestral medicine from Ukraine, from Russia, from like all throughout that region. And there was something so sweet in knowing that, and in kind of returning to something that would have been such an important pillar, within that space.
Yeah, for me, that's kombucha. I think like I got really into kombucha way before it was cool. I opened the world's first kombucha cocktail bar.
Whoa.
That's my claim to fame.
Amazing.
Culture shock. Shout out. Rest in peace. It was a great time. But yeah, I didn't know at the time that kombucha, goes back to Russia. A lot of Russian people, Ukrainian people are making kombucha in their homes. It's super common. And one of my friends at the time, when I was running a kombucha bar, he was like, oh, my friend and his family, they make kombucha and they're actually starting a company now in the back of a juice bar. And I'm like, oh, cool. And now that's Wild Bay Kombucha.
Oh, whoa.
But it started because it was like their family's recipe. So that is one of those. And of course, every cultural tradition has ferments, which is, I think, one of the coolest things about looking back and learning from the wisdom of our ancestors, all of them.
Absolutely.
Is that every culture knows you need that fermented food. You need those live cultures. It helps to preserve the food. It helps to empower your gut and your immune system. So yeah, for me, definitely kombucha was the ancestral wisdom food that found me before I understood why it was looking for me and why I was looking for it.
That's so magical. I love that.
And we're still best friends to this day, me and kombucha. Okay, so such a beautiful journey. And I feel like I want to pivot. It's not really a pivot because we're still talking about the connection between food and health and the environment, which is the theme of your entire experience. But we met at the Rodale Institute at the Regenerative Healthcare Conference. The second or third one?
The second. What year did you? 2024. So that would have been like 3 years into that program.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. That's how we met. And I was just there attending it. And it was one of those things. So you probably hear this a lot, but let me just share with you my experience of seeing the ad for the conference. I saw the ad, I think on LinkedIn. And I thought, who designed a conference only for me? Why did someone create a conference designed exactly for me, just for me, exactly only what I care about in every possible way for every single minute of the conference? It's rare to have that experience because I feel like my interests are really weird and niche and mushed together. Like I care about soil health and I care about the microbiome and I care about farmers and I care about eating a lot of plants, but also eating grass-fed meat and also like improving healthcare and policy. And I'm just like, that's weird. Why would an entire conference? I think I called my husband and was like, somebody made a conference only for me. And I have to go. I'm going to this conference. He's like, okay, geez. So that's cool because you envisioned and co-created that conference. So I want to know, like, where did the spark come from? And how did you fan that flame to turn it into the beautiful event full of incredible people that it became?
Yeah, thank you. And want to back up like 2 steps because when I saw your registration come in, I was like, oh, we're going to be friends. I was so excited to see, like, I remember you just had this long, like, almost poetic response to what, we had put out there. We had a couple intake questions because we wanted to understand who's in the room. And I was just so grateful you were there. And yeah, when I was hired, I was just kind of given this, nebulous mandate of like, hey, we want to have a conference and we want to connect doctors and farmers, and we want to weave in soil health. We want to have, like doctors get 19.6 hours of nutrition education in all of medical school. That's it. And like anecdotally, when I talk to friends who've come through med school, they're like, oh yeah, no, that's overinflated. It's maybe 4, maybe, if you opt in to a handful of little classes here and there. So, of no fault of their own, they're not equipped with nutrition literacy. And for me, in thinking about, okay, so we want to weave in nutrition. We want to talk about food as medicine and give kind of the crash course in that. But where does food start? Food starts on the farm. Food starts in the soil. And so ecological literacy to me is almost even more paramount than anything else, because in order to understand food, you have to understand where it's coming from. And so that's a lot of what drove the thinking and the weaving around it. And for me, one of my just utmost favorite things to do is bring people together, is to just build longer tables and throw more chairs around it, and to have people together around like really good food. That was also, anytime we threw one of those, the like non-negotiable and the by far highest line item on that back end budget was food. Because if we're talking about food as medicine, you better believe, like, you're not having eggs that are coming from a bag. Like, you're going to have incredible meals that like just provoke something in you, that spark conversation, that you can have the best roasted carrots of your life. And they're like, oh yeah, that's from the farm down the street. Oh, the farmer's here. That to me gives like a sensory aspect, which I think is so important. Yeah. And just weaving together, I keep calling it unlikely allies. And that's what I think at the end of the day it comes down to, is creating that web of connection between doctors and farmers and regenerative brands and food systems advocates and folks who are in big food too. It's like you need all of the component parts to create the type of ecosystem that generates the type of community that comes out of that. And, in my time at Rodale doing that work, the thing I am by far and away most proud of is just seeing the community that has come out of it, and seeing the connections that have led to like business partnerships and books, and like just there's so many wonderful examples of really beautiful just lifelong friendships that have come from it. And for that, I'm so grateful.
I can personally attest to that. I have at least 3 people that I met at that conference who I would now say are close lifelong friends, who I have partnered with, who I have created with, who I launched a new podcast with at Cornell. And it all started at that conference under a tent in a field. And I love the phrase unlikely allies. I also feel like it's abovers and beyonders. It's the people who, by all means, could have stayed in their lane. They're doing fine. Mm-hmm. They're thriving. They're doctors. They're successful.
Yeah.
They're killing the game. And yet they thought, I really want to learn about human health and agriculture and figure out how this is all connected.
For sure.
Like, that's so above and beyond. And so when you go into that privileged space, which is only full of people who have chosen to take time out of their very busy lives, very accomplished lives,
definitely,
to be under a tent in a field, talking about these things, eating the roasted carrots. It's like, wow, these are really special people who are here. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite people that I met was Will Harris. I
them.
happened to, so I showed up on the first day, not late, but fashionably late, like 5 minutes late, ran up to the table, checked myself in, got inside, and then, politely took a seat at the back of the room. And I'm the kind of person who, when I go into a room, I'm always looking for the most interesting person because I'm just like curious. And so I saw a guy in a cowboy hat and I was like, fuck yeah, like I'm going to sit with the cowboy. Had never heard of Will Harris, had never heard his story, was not a Rogan podcast listener. So I sit down, next to the cowboy and I'm like, hello. And like, I think you were speaking, like the intros were happening. And then it was like, okay, like, we're going to have our first like keynote speaker, Will Harris is going to speak. But first, like turn to your neighbor and introduce yourselves, And I turn, I'm like, hi, like I'm Marian, like blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, how about you? And he's like, I'm Will Harris. And I was like, oh, okay. We had a lovely little meet and greet. He spoke, of course, brought the house down. And then we became friends. Like, we're going to visit him next month. And we went and visited him last year.
Oh,
I moved cattle on my birthday.
Incredible.
Yes. It was a life-changing experience. So that's just one
Yeah.
of the huge, impactful friendships that came from this, like, I don't even know if conference is the right word. Convening, like.
That's the word I've been using.
Sacred space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Conference sounds so impersonal.
It's like clinical.
It was intimate.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's power in that intimacy.
For sure.
Because you can't avoid each other. You have to have the real conversations.
Mm-hmm. And they're not always easy.
Right.
And I think that's some of the medicine too, especially in the regenerative world. My God, it's so fractured. You get 100 people in a room together, you have 150 different definitions of what regeneration and regenerative agriculture is. And to me, at least, like, that's okay. I think plurality is such an important part of it. And by capturing that diversity of perspective, you're actually getting a really honest picture of what the whole looks like.
Right.
It's like, I always liken it to like a dandelion with like the big poofy, it's called a pappus, like the seed head of it. And in that center, on the little white cap, like that to me is where truth lives, is like the intersection of all the different perspectives on the outside of that sphere. And I feel like within that convening, I'm like, back when I was there, I was like a retreat style conference. Like it, it did feel so intimate. And I think there is something so sacred about like sub 150 person gatherings. I don't know if you've seen like Dunbar's Number, but it's this concept. It was highlighted in the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari.
Mm-hmm.
But Dunbar's Number is basically like in our little primal animalistic bodies, back when we were more close to apes, like the amount of apes that could exist in a colony before fracturing off was 150. That's like the number of meaningful relationships you can kind of cultivate within a community before it fractures into different sizes. And so to me, to have a gathering that retains its intimacy, which I think anytime you're doing deep systems-oriented work, you need intimacy. It's a key component. Because if you're just saying, oh, hi, Marian. Okay, yeah, it's day 4 now. Bye, Marian. Like you're not getting the same thing as when you get to just deeply engage with one another over the course of that period. So to me, there's an art to it. I've called it connection architecture for a long time. And I think it's so true. It's like we need the right structure around how we gather to like encourage people to step into connection and to not turn away when there are moments of discord, but to turn toward.
Yeah, I'm in my head right now. I'm flooded with metaphors for physiology, right? I'm thinking like, okay, like the institutions are the bones and like the organizations are the muscles and the tendons. And then these gatherings are like fascia. Like it's in there and it's essential and it's underappreciated, but it's really holding everything together. And we don't if we don't care about it, when we don't care about it, everything else begins to break down. But what do we talk about at the high level? The bones, the muscles, these big structural pieces. Nobody was talking about fascia when I was in school. I had to learn about that on the internet at some point. And now we're like, oh, wow, this is really critical to how everything functions. It's woven into every little detail. But that is the same thing with these intimate gatherings. Like, there are people and they might have these big jobs at big institutions. They're doing big things. But if we don't take that time to meet each other and to actually get to know each other. I mean, one of the really powerful things about that gathering was, as you said, there's few enough people that each person got a chance to stand up and introduce themselves. And I remember I stood up and introduced myself, and within 24 hours, like 5 different people had sought me out to have a personal conversation because something I had said triggered them to want to meet me. And the same went for me and other people, right? How often do you get that at a conference? You might see someone's bio in the pamphlet and find them interesting, but it's very different from them getting up and sort of sharing what lights them up, why are they here, what matters to them.
Absolutely.
And I feel like humans, we're so funny. We love to fight. We love to think that we're so different from each other. But when we actually sit down and talk, we tend to find out that we have a lot more in common than we have different. And we mostly want the same things. So there's so much magic and beauty there.
We're really not that different from the apes.
It's true. And incidentally, I found, if you're wondering what the number is for teenage girls before the breakdown happens, I think it's like 7. You really can't have more than 17 girls. They begin to fracture at that point. So keep that in mind for the future.
I was going to say checks out based on my lived experience.
See, this is just math and science. We're just doing the science right here.
It's true.
So this word, regenerate, I want to go back to it. Because like you said, there's different definitions of it. It, of course, exists in the agriculture space very critically because we're looking at a time period where we have soil and water that are depleted and polluted. And we need to figure out how to turn back the clock. If you Google regenerative medicine, you will not get what we were doing at that conference.
No, it's like peptide therapy.
It's peptide injections. And I get it. They're trying to regenerate tissue and turn back the clock. But this sort of holistic framework of regeneration, I think that it's important on a technical level and also at this level of the metaphor, which is to say, like, every area of our health and society right now really needs to regenerate. The average person's health is run down, their microbiome is depleted, and it's not really just enough to like cut a few foods out of your diet and, feel a little bit less bloated. It's like you really have to regenerate that gut microbiome. And, we're all strung out on screens and technology, and we can't be present, and we really have to regenerate our ability to sit and be in nature and be with each other. And our soil is a living thing, and it has lost much of its life, and we have to build it back. So talk to me about how you experience the word regeneration, what it really means to you in your life, and then how you see the movement shaping and growing and where it's going.
Yeah. Well, I love that question, and I appreciate the framing too, because I think there's so many dimensions to it. And whenever I'm giving a lecture on this topic, a lot of what I'll introduce is almost the nuanced difference between sustainability and regeneration. Because you see so many companies have, an office of sustainability or like sustainability programs. All good, all great. We love sustainability. But just even conceptually, what does sustainability imply? To sustain something. So sustaining the status quo as is. Regeneration, I think, really asks the question, what's asking to be healed? How do we look deeper than that status quo and say, okay, let's back up a couple steps and look at like, what have we lost in the process as a result of the status quo? And then how do we go about mending that so that then maybe once we've done enough regenerating, then we can talk about sustaining and, keeping things at that baseline. So for me, it's so much of it is semantics. But then also, I think in very esoteric ways. So for me, regeneration is really just a form of remembrance. It's remembering our role as part of an ecosystem. It's remembering how to properly engage with our terrain, whether that's our inner terrain and our microbiome or the external terrain and soil, and looking at, the microbial life and feeding that with things that are, ecologically appropriate, seasonally appropriate. I think a lot about seasonal eating in my own lived experience, leaning into that heavily and being like, if I'm regenerating my body, like what does that mean for how I live in my day-to-day life? What does that mean for how I eat in winter as someone who lives in Eastern Pennsylvania, in this food shed, in this ecosystem, versus, as I'm engaging out in the world, how do my decisions out in the marketplace, at the grocery store, at the farmer's market, how does that impact soil, water, planetary health overall? So to get a little more technical on the regeneration side, in context of soil, to me, that means you're building back soil organic matter that's been lost. I mean, we're losing, I think it's 30 soccer fields of soil every minute. There's a stat from, I think it's like the Organic Federation. It's terrifying. Yeah. And, when you see the UN statistics and there's 60 harvests left, I mean, that statistic is probably 10 years old, so 50. But there's been a lot of deconstructing of that stat, because in some places there's 0 harvests left because the soil has been so depleted, climate change has been nuts, and so it's just not hospitable for growing food. Whereas in other places, there's a little more latitude, like the Mid-Atlantic. We have great ecosystems for farming. And so I think, to me, regeneration looks at, how do we cultivate right relationship and reciprocity with our ecosystem? How do we then become active practitioners of balance and work in tandem with nature? How do we make sure we're not spraying pesticides and insecticides and fungicides and fertilizers and herbicides all over our cropland that then gets into our water? Even look at the Mississippi River Delta and the Gulf of Mexico. There's so much hypoxia there, and it is no longer a habitable ecosystem. And then you've had the collapse of entire food sheds as a result of how we're treating the land. And so I think, for me, engaging with regeneration is looking almost at the center nodule of a web where there's so many component parts. Farmers' health is implicated by that. Community health is implicated. Watershed health, drinking water, and so on and so forth. Even recreation. You have rivers that people are like, oh, you can't swim in that. It's got brain-eating amoebas because the watershed has been so disrupted. So for me, it's how do we become better stewards is more of the question that regeneration asks. And the answer is going to be so different dependent on the ecosystem and the community and to use the French word, the terroir that you're within. So
yeah,
that's how I think about it.
You said something a minute ago. You said something like, what is asking to be healed?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to go back to that phrase because I feel like so much of what's misunderstood in human medicine is the identification of the symptom as the problem. Whereas what I try to explain to people is the symptom is the body asking you to notice what's actually wrong. It's desperately saying to you, look at this. Look.
Hey,
hi. It's like a toddler throwing a tantrum. You would never say, well, people do say, okay, the tantrum is not the problem, right? The problem is the toddler is hungry. They missed their nap. They're overstimulated from watching too much TV. They had cake at a birthday party and they're coming down from that high, right? The tantrum is the symptom. The problem is underneath that. And the wisdom of parenting asks you to see the symptom, troubleshoot the problem, and solve the problem. If you just yell at a toddler for screaming, you haven't solved it. If you see a screaming toddler and you go, oh my God, we had brunch with grandma, they missed their nap, they're just tired, bam, you solve the problem. Actually, right?
Yeah.
With the body, I used to be covered head to toe in eczema. And there are a lot of doctors, most doctors, who were just like, well, great, you would take a steroid, or these days a biologic, right?
Mm-hmm.
The eczema is not the problem. The eczema was telling me about the problem. It was showing me what needed to be healed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the interesting things that I've seen in the regeneration conversation, as opposed to the sustainability conversation, is that carbon is not the problem. It's a cycle that's broken.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll hear people in sustainability say, oh, there's too much carbon. As opposed to, actually, carbon is essential for everything, but there's a beautiful carbon cycle, and we've broken the cycle. Yeah. And the excess carbon that we're seeing is a symptom that's telling us what needs to be healed. But if what you try to do to solve that is just like put a bag in the clouds that catches carbon, or whatever bizarre technology some bro is trying to fund for $1 billion right now, you've missed the deep ancestral cries of a cycle that is begging to be restored. The same way that if you put a corticosteroid on your rash, you've missed the call from your gut, from your liver, from your nervous system, that there's something, from your skin microbiome even, that there's something that is desperately trying to reach you to say, hello, there's something that needs to be healed in here. We missed the call. Yeah. So I just really wanted to highlight that phrasing, because I love how regeneration asks us to listen to the call and to figure out what's really needing to be healed.
I think the key there that you've highlighted is the listening, because so often we think we know best, and we'll, approach things through the head, and we're like, we'll do this, and this. And it's like, no, but what's actually here? What needs holding? And I think to go back to questions that really get a group going, at the last gathering, it was a think tank kind of at the intersection between soil health and human health with a lot of different stakeholders. The last gathering I had facilitated, I opened with the question who are you? We don't want to hear titles. We don't want to hear what you do. Who are you in your most true essence? And to see people in that room be held and witnessed in their authentic expression. I went first. I was like, okay, I identify as a systems midwife. And what that means to me is I show up and hold systems in transition. And I think that's kind of the moment we're in right now. And that's why I'm like, I don't ever say I am the systems midwife. No, I'm not. I am one of many. You're one of them. There's,
heaven forbid we only have one systems midwife. This world needs millions.
Yeah. Oh my God. And that's, so for me, that's my framing that I approach this with, is transition of any kind needs holding. Birth is a wild process. I haven't gone through it myself yet. I mean, on the way here, yes, but we all did. But
good times, just sliding into the world.
Man, oh man. But it's you're uncomfortable, and it's dark, and it's cramped, and you have no idea what's going on. And, your mom's presumably yelling at some juncture in the process. There's a lot happening, but on the other end of it is something beyond our wildest imagination, is something so beautiful. And I think that's kind of how we're moving as we arc from this world that has been so extractive and focused on how do we take versus how do we give. And I think that's the framing that regeneration offers. I think it's, we all have the masculine and feminine energies within us in whatever balance is most natural for, our interpersonal system. And for me, regeneration is so inherently feminine. It's got that element of like, hey, I'm listening. I'm here to nourish. And that's like, I love your point about it's not just carbon, because it's not carbon sequestration is essential. Like, we need to be thinking in that way. But I would invite, the tech bro who's thinking about how can we put a bag in the sky to capture the excess carbon. I would invite him into this process and be like, hey, maybe that, I'm not going to knock it till we try it. Not my favorite approach, but like, what would happen if you just get down into the ecosystem and really listened to what it's asking for? Like, maybe instead of growing monocrops of corn and soy on rotation, whether organic or conventional, maybe this ecosystem needs diversity. Maybe it needs companion planting. Maybe there's some way that balance is wanting to be restored into the soil that it's just not getting from, the same cycling crops over and over again. Maybe the same is true for communities. And so it's, how can we think about diversity as our biggest strong suit, both, microbial diversity and diversity of plant species and of people and of cultures. I feel like it all is so interwoven, and that's what I keep coming back to.
I absolutely agree. I've gone on many a diversity rant because we really can learn from nature that diversity is key to health. Absolutely. And ignore that at your own peril. Mm-hmm. I also want to sort of point back to the birth framework because I have given birth thrice. At home, in bed, no doctors. Lovely. There were midwives. Thank you, midwives. You rock. But the thing that I learned across 3 births, to the point that during my 3rd birth, I joked about it, which I could not have done during my 1st birth, joked before pushing out a baby. I turned to the midwife and I said, I feel like telling you that I can't do this, and that's how I know that I'm about to do it. And she said, yep, you got it. And I think 5 minutes later, my baby was in my arms. And I think for all of us in this moment, I'm going to be honest, it's been a hard, year, decade, week, all of them. The news cycle is depressing. There's a lot of bad news. I think a lot of people are feeling like, I don't know if we can do this. But if we learn from the experience of birth, that moment where you're sure that you cannot do it is right before you do it. And you just have to hang on and push. So I share that as my personal experience and also as a metaphor for what we need to commit to as a culture.
Absolutely.
It's uncomfortable. It's dark. There's shouting, And that it's a big transition point, but we can make it through. And on the other side, there's a cute little squishy baby, or at least
a better world.
A better world. And aren't those both so nice to hold?
Absolutely.
But the squishy babies are so good, and they smell delicious.
I think about, too, one of my favorite, thinkers and visionaries in this space is a woman named Valerie Carr. And she's this just brilliant Sikh activist. Her whole body of work is around a revolutionary love. And she uses this metaphor of, is this the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb? And for me, I so feel like it's the womb. And to your point, we are in that moment of, oh my God, what is happening? Are we going to make it through this? And I just think back to the movement holders, in the Black community and the Indigenous community who are kind of welcome white people. We've been at this for so long. And, yet we stay committed to it. We stay dedicated to that vision that knows something better is birthing through us. And so I think there's so much to learn from that type of tenacity and commitment to just holding tight to the vision for what's emerging, while also not spiritually bypassing the pain of what's in the present. And it's terrifying for a lot of people right now. And it very far from regenerative. It's our systems are demonstrating the worst of their extractivism and just lack of valuing of human life and talking about diversity. It's seemingly absent from the at least collective systems value set right now. And so the question that kind of is front of mind for me through this whole thing is like, what will it take to return that ethos, to the highest seats of power? How do we make sure that that is a common thread? And even the regenerative movement, that's as old as time itself. And Indigenous people have been stewarding that wisdom for so long from around the world, from their diverse ecosystems everywhere. And so that's where I do think it really is a return, versus, some new thing that we're inventing. So
Absolutely. So in the fertile soil of this conversation, we are planting a vision for the future.
Yeah.
And you are in a transition right now,
Mm-hmm.
and you're birthing some new ideas, some wisdom. So, I invite you to share a little bit. What's next for you? What are you most excited about? Where are you pushing your own limits, maybe? What are you growing towards?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a really exciting transitional moment. I think especially, I don't know if you're into astrology, but like in the lunar calendar that a lot of cultures in Asia follow, we're exiting that year of the snake and moving into the year of the horse. It's like the fire horse. So there's a lot of, forward momentum, but also steadiness and expression. And so I feel like the timing is just so ripe to be moving into this like external chapter and kind of shedding what's no longer in alignment with, how I'm wanting to move and express in the world. So I think for me, I'm leaning more into building things myself. First is a healthy vending business. Back in January of last year, I had a hospital visit. My resting heart rate was around 154. I was laying down and all of a sudden my heart rate jumped and I couldn't get it down no matter what I did. So my fiance Aiden took me to the ER, and of course, ER, long wait. So I'm sitting there palpitating like crazy and I'm hungry because I, didn't eat breakfast in this whole ordeal. And I'm face to face with the Cheeto man and we're making eye contact, me and him. I'm so hungry. And I'm like, we're not gonna tango today. I'm not putting that on my body. And so of course, I'm in some sort of delirium from having had an elevated heart rate this whole time. Ended up being COVID, a really weird case of it. I was fine. But out of that was born a healthy vending company. So we started Vendwell Provisions, and we're really focused on how do we get healthy alternatives to snacks and to drinks and all that fun stuff in places where the community needs it most and is engaging with it the most. So, instead of saying, no, you can't have snacks, it's like, well, you can, but here are versions of them that are seed oil free, that aren't ultra processed, that aren't highly refined, that, are lower in sugar and salt and are absent of a lot of really processed ingredients. So that hopefully, they can notice that they're feeling better, that, they're focusing better. So that's one of the things I'm working on. The other is getting back into my own independent consultancy, Conscious Consulting. From that, I'm looking at building out a women's food systems consultancy, pulling in all the amazing powerhouse women in my web that I've gotten to curate over the years, and really just have it be a collaborative of these brilliant minds that I know to work on all things regeneration. Part of that for me as, an independent consultant is gathering and is hosting bespoke, very curated events kind of across the space and then facilitating them. So that's some of what I'm leaning into now. And honestly, I'm just an open book. I'm really surrendered to whatever is meant to emerge for me at this moment. But it's been so wonderful to be in this time of transition because it's allowed the people in my web to show up for me in really beautiful ways. And I'm not one to ever be like, hey, I need help or I need support. And it's just, and I'm working on that too. I mean, that's part of the journey. But yeah, it's been so beautiful to just be so warmly held by all of these people in my ecosystem, like yourself. So very grateful for that.
It's so beautiful. And I'm just picturing, bringing it back to the start of the conversation, like little Nadine.
Mm-hmm.
She had this vision. She is still holding that little flame. And now the year of the flaming horse, I'm just like, 90s girls, giddy up. Like Lisa Frank, like picture that image of like the glorious rainbow horse. Like we get to live that year now and just burst forward with our creativity and our regeneration and our matriarchal spirit. And hell yeah, it's so exciting. Like
It
what a
really
beautiful
is.
frontier you have arrived upon.
Thank you.
What a thrill.
Where's a limited 2 when we need one to get some Lisa Frank
Okay,
materials?
so after you get the sustainable, healthy, vending machines going, I'm thinking bring back limited 2. We're going to need that for girls these days don't know how good we had it. You go to limited 2, you get your Lisa Frank pen and sticker, head over to Sam Goody, buy a CD, and there are no worries. There are no problems in the world.
No scrolling.
No scrolling. No drama. No TikTok. Wow. Ancestral wisdom, the ancestral wisdom of the 90s. Well, I just want to thank you so much for joining me in conversation today. And you've given me some words that I am going to carry with me. I like the systems midwife. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
And I really am seeing that. I'm seeing the need. I'm seeing the people who are doing that, women and men. But shout out to the women especially, no offense. And I feel like we've just covered so much that I know I'm going to be thinking about for a while. And I very much am looking forward to whatever and all that you are going to do next. And I cannot wait to convene again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was so nourishing on all levels. And I just appreciate you curating the space and the conversation and the work you're doing in the world. So.
Well, thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Thank you once again for listening to the Marian Flaxman Network Podcast, a podcast dedicated to reintroducing personal narratives into critical public health topics. For more information on me, Marian, please visit my website at marianflaxman.com. For more information on my guest, Nadine Clopton, please find the links in the show notes. As a reminder, this podcast is separate from my work at the Cornell Joan Klein Jacob Center for Precision Nutrition and Health. This episode was produced by Brain Trust Productions and sponsored by Inform Solutions Consulting. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.